Welcome to Capital Catch-Up, the podcast where we break down the latest developments in Congress. I'm Victor.
And I'm Leanie. Today we're covering a slate of bills moving through the House and Senate, from geothermal energy to broadband, from maternal health to cybersecurity. We'll explain what each proposal does, why it matters, and how it could affect everyday Americans.
Let's start with the Geothermal Cost Recovery Authority Act of 2025, a House resolution. It would amend the Geothermal Steam Act of 1970 to give the Department of the Interior authority to require geothermal leaseholders to reimburse the government for administrative and permitting costs. The bill also mandates a 5-year report to Congress evaluating the impact and recommending updates. By recouping costs, the Interior Department hopes to make geothermal development more financially sustainable, which could lower energy prices and expand clean power options for consumers.
Right. Geothermal has long been a low-carbon energy source, but high upfront permitting costs have been a barrier. If the government can recover those costs, developers might see a clearer path to new projects, potentially bringing more renewable electricity to the grid and creating jobs in rural areas where geothermal resources are located.
Next up is the MAP for Broadband Funding Act, a Senate bill. This legislation modernizes the Broadband Funding Map, requiring the FCC to collect timely data from federal agencies and conduct an inquiry into the map's functionality and transparency. It also tasks the Comptroller General with a study on agency roles and progress. The goal is to prevent redundant overbuilding of broadband infrastructure and improve taxpayer savings by ensuring federal funds are directed where they're truly needed.
In plain terms, the map is supposed to show where broadband gaps exist. If the data are outdated or incomplete, the government might fund projects that duplicate existing service, wasting money. Better data means more efficient deployment, which could bring high-speed internet to underserved communities, helping students, remote workers, and small businesses stay connected.
The Gaming Advertisement to Minors Enforcement Act of 2026, known as the GAME Act, is a Senate bill that would prohibit digital advertising platforms from showing targeted sports gambling ads to minors. It defines covered digital advertising platform minor and targeted advertisement directed to a minor that promotes a sports gambling platform. Violations could be fined up to $100,000 per instance, with enforcement by the Federal Trade Commission.
This is a response to growing concerns that youth are being exposed to gambling promotions online. By restricting targeted ads, the bill aims to reduce early exposure to gambling, which research links to higher rates of problem gambling later in life. For parents, it could mean fewer intrusive ads on the apps their kids use.
The Renewing Our PACT Act of 2026, a Senate bill, focuses on civilian federal employees exposed to toxic burn pits in overseas contingency operations. It creates a presumption that certain diseases are caused by that exposure, making it easier for affected workers to obtain workers' compensation. The Secretary of Labor must maintain a list of presumptive diseases and submit an implementation report within a year.
Burn pit exposure has been a long-standing health issue for service members and civilian contractors. This bill could streamline the claims process, providing faster medical and financial support to those suffering from respiratory illnesses, cancers, or other conditions linked to toxic inhalation.
The Grouse Act of 2026, another Senate bill, establishes a program to pay landowners for restoring upland forest habitats. It amends the Food Security Act of 1985, covering costs like labor, planting, and materials for native vegetation that benefits upland wildlife. The program would be administered by the Secretary of Agriculture.
Restoring upland ecosystems supports biodiversity, improves water quality, and can even provide carbon sequestration benefits. For landowners, the payments create a financial incentive to engage in conservation, turning ecological stewardship into an economic opportunity.
The Outage Refund Protection Act, a Senate bill, requires telephone, cable, satellite, and internet providers to automatically refund customers when service outages last 4 hours or more. It also mandates record-keeping, accessibility for people with disabilities, and bans fees for callbacks. The FCC and FTC would develop the implementing rules.
Service outages affect everyone, from remote workers relying on broadband to families watching TV. Automatic refunds would give consumers immediate compensation without the hassle of filing claims, and the accessibility provisions ensure that people with disabilities aren't left out of the process.
The Moms Matter Act, a Senate bill, addresses maternal mental health and substance use disorders. It creates a grant program for community-based organizations and health providers to deliver mental health services to pregnant and postpartum individuals. It also funds workforce development to diversify and expand the maternal mental health care workforce, prioritizing groups with higher maternal mortality and morbidity rates.
Maternal mental health has been a silent crisis, especially in communities of color and low-income areas. By funneling grant money directly to providers on the ground, the bill could expand access to counseling, therapy, and substance use treatment at a critical time for mothers and babies.
The Restoring Overtime Pay Act of 2026, a Senate bill, amends the Fair Labor Standards Act to set a minimum salary threshold for employees exempt from overtime. The threshold starts at $45,000 in 2026 and will be automatically adjusted each year based on the 55th percentile of full-time salaried earnings. The Secretary of Labor must publish a notice before any change takes effect.
This means many workers who currently earn just above the exemption level would become eligible for overtime pay. For families living paycheck to paycheck, that extra pay for extra hours could make a real difference in household budgets.
The Aaron Salter Jr. Responsible Body Armor Possession Act, a Senate bill, would prohibit civilians from purchasing, owning, or possessing enhanced body armor, defined as armor exceeding RF1 resistance. Law enforcement, corrections officers, government agencies, and those who already own such armor before enactment would be exempt. Violations could result in fines and up to 5 years in prison.
The intent is to limit high-level protective gear to those who need it for public safety, reducing the risk that such equipment falls into the hands of criminals or extremist groups.
The Avert Future Violence Act of 2026, a Senate bill, directs the Attorney General to study the link between animal cruelty and future human violence. It also creates a $4 million grant program to help entities develop detection strategies and early intervention resources, aiming to stop animal cruelty and rehabilitate offenders.
Research shows a strong correlation between early animal cruelty and later violent behavior. By funding studies and interventions, the bill could help law enforcement and social services intervene before patterns of violence escalate.
The Informed Foster Youth Act of 2026, a Senate bill, modifies case plan requirements for children in foster care. It mandates personalized options for housing, health insurance, education, and employment services, and ensures youth have access to their health and education records and identification documents. It also establishes a list of rights, including education, healthcare, and participation in case planning. The Act takes effect on the first day of the first fiscal year after enactment, with a possible state delay.
Giving foster youth clearer rights and more control over their case plans can improve stability and outcomes, helping them transition to adulthood with better education and employment prospects.
The Government Surveillance Reform Act of 2026, a House resolution, reforms foreign intelligence surveillance authorities, especially Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It limits warrantless queries of U.S. persons, communications, prohibits reverse targeting, and sets data retention limits. It also strengthens the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, enhances transparency, and protects vehicle data from warrantless searches.
Balancing national security with privacy is a perennial challenge. This bill aims to tighten safeguards around the collection of Americans' communications, which could reassure the public while still allowing intelligence agencies to pursue legitimate threats.
The Increasing Access to Lung Cancer Screening Act, a Senate bill, amends the Social Security Act to require Medicaid to cover annual lung cancer screenings with no cost sharing for eligible individuals. It also expands Medicaid coverage for tobacco cessation counseling and pharmacotherapy, and mandates that Medicare and private insurers cover screenings without prior authorization. The provisions take effect on January 1, 2028, with some state-specific exceptions.
Early detection of lung cancer dramatically improves survival rates. By removing cost barriers and prior authorization hurdles, the bill could increase screening rates among high-risk populations, especially low-income smokers who rely on Medicaid.
The Maritime Cybersecurity Act, a Senate bill, addresses cyber risks in maritime facilities. It requires the Secretary of the Department, overseeing the Coast Guard, to assess cybersecurity risks of software and hardware used in ports and vessels, and mandates annual reports from facility owners on their cyber posture. Compliance must meet National Institute of Standards and Technology standards.
Ports are critical infrastructure, and a cyber breach could disrupt supply chains nationwide. This bill pushes for systematic risk assessments and reporting, helping to shore up defenses against ransomware or other attacks that could cripple trade.
Finally, the Energy Cost Fairness and Reliability Act of 2026, a Senate bill, tackles the strain that large load facilities like data centers place on the electric grid. It directs the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to issue a rule establishing standard interconnection procedures, requiring large load customers to pay 100% of interconnection study costs, assign network upgrades to them, and prioritize those that use battery backup, hire apprentices, or agree to labor peace contracts. It also requires non-firm transmission access for co-located large loads and allows injection rights without deliverability studies for non-firm injections.
In practice, this means big data center operators will bear more of the cost of connecting to the grid, encouraging them to invest in backup power and local job training. The rule aims to keep the grid reliable as demand from high-consumption users grows.
Turning to the Congressional Daily Records, on May 28, 2026, the Senate met in a pro forma session and adjourned until June 1st. Senator Deb Fischer was appointed acting president pro tempore, replacing Senator Chuck Grassley. The Senate also announced a vote on the nomination of Kathleen S. Lane for United States District Judge in Montana. The House was not in session that day, but will hold a pro forma session on May 29th.
Earlier, on May 26th, the House convened under Speaker pro tempore Riley M. Moore. After a prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance, the House approved its journal, announced committee appointments, including to the National Committee on Vital and Health Statistics, and received executive communications from the Departments of Defense and Education. Several bills were introduced and referred to committees, covering topics like surface coal mining, military hazing, and prescription drug pricing.
That wraps up our deep dive into the current legislative landscape. Listeners should keep an eye on committee hearings and floor votes for these bills, especially the ones with direct consumer impact, like the Outage Refund Protection Act, the Moms Matter Act, and the Energy Cost Fairness and Reliability Act.
And watch for the upcoming Senate vote on the federal judgeship nomination, as well as any updates from the FCC and FTC on the broadband map and outage refund rules.
Thanks for joining us on Capital Catch-Up.
Until next time, stay informed.
Goodbye.